exactly what happened. Going through the papers with me now, Harrison Griffiths, the political commentator with Young Voices UK. Harrison, good morning.
Morning, Rosie. How are you?
I'm very well. Glastonbury obviously dominating. Sort of remind us what happened and if you think the wrong call was made here.
Yeah, so I mean, at the Glastonbury festival, one of the acts got on stage and started basically chanting certain slogans about Israel, the classic ones about, from river to sea, chanting things like death to the IDF, which were not particularly savoury. They were cheered on by people, often not knowing exactly the types of things that are necessitated by such demands being put into action. And there's been a lot of controversy over whether they should have been aired, and indeed people calling for criminal charges. I think it's very, very difficult to say that the wrong call was made by the BBC, given that it was being streamed live. But I also think that's a completely fair argument to say that taxpayers shouldn't have to fund it. I do not think, however, that we should be talking about charges when there was no incitement to imminent lawless action. I think it is repugnant, irrational speech, but I don't think that really ought to warrant criminal charges.
Yeah, the Times is writing. They've obviously spoken to some staff working at the BBC who say they feel kind of ashamed of what happened.
Yeah, completely understandably. It's going to upset and offend an awful lot of people, and quite justly so. It was, as I say, vile, irrational, repugnant, cheered on by people who were mired in a desire for social desirability and status signalling. But to be perfectly honest, people at the BBC who are feeling responsible for it, unless they're in senior leadership, really shouldn't be feeling bad. It's a live show being streamed, and there's not really a lot you can do making split-second calls like that.
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister said the BBC needs to explain how these scenes came to be broadcast. The Prime Minister, though, is facing some pretty tricky headlines of his own. In the Times, John Curtis was speaking on Times Radio yesterday. The paper have written up the interview. Keir Starmer's had the worst start of any new Prime Minister. I mean, it'll be the year anniversary on Saturday because we went to the polls, a year ago on Friday. I mean, do you agree with his analysis? It's been pretty bruising.
It certainly has. I mean, it is really remarkable. I can't believe it's already been a year, or almost a year, since there was one of the largest majorities in British electoral history. And now we're talking about the very same party polling second or third, pretty on par on average with the Conservatives and behind the insurgent, seemingly unstoppable rise of the Reform Party at the moment. We are talking about a government somehow, again, with that incredible majority they have, that looks increasingly vulnerable by the day, with an awful lot of U-turns, the welfare U-turns being the last one, which were forced on it by its own MPs. People talking about, the type of talks being compared to the closing days of the Theresa May government, which famously did not have any kind of majority at all. It is a really kind of remarkable turnaround. And when you're looking at these last two U-turns in particular, on the winter fuel allowance and on the welfare bill, you're talking about, in the grand scheme of Britain's fiscal situation, fairly small cuts to the overall budget. And that doesn't necessarily bode well when debts and deficits are still incredibly high, when difficult decisions need to be made across the board on regulation, taxes and spending. The government almost seems paralysed in that sense. It can't make any kind of decisions whatsoever. And so it is incredibly difficult without, as Sir John Curtis says, an overarching grand vision, a roadmap that Keir Starmer has or doesn't have, needs to articulate. It seems very, very difficult for them to be able to do anything.
Because I think we thought the challenge was going to be from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister telling the public that difficult decisions had to be made. Actually, in practice, it's been telling their own MPs that that's been the reality. We don't know how that vote on the welfare bill will go. That's tomorrow. The government is saying so they're confident it will pass. But, we'll see. It could be 50 or so rebels. The Times is reporting still at this stage, very reluctant to put their name to that legislation. Front page of the Times, we're going to look at this in a bit more detail in the business news. But entry-level jobs plunging by a third since the launch of ChatGPT. I mean, I've got a sister 10 years younger than me, sort of entering the workforce, lots of her friends having real difficulty trying to get that first job. And this sort of hints at potentially why.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting to measure the fall in entry level jobs that don't require a degree since ChatGPT first became a thing. As you say, Rosie, it seems to have declined by just under a third. Although I'm a little bit cautious on drawing a clear conclusion between ChatGPT and this job decline. And we've seen an overall slowdown in the rate of growth of job advertisements across the economy, unfortunately. And it's the entry level jobs that are usually the first signal that there is going to be a slowdown. On the plus side, it's usually the case that when the job market starts to pick up again, that these are some of the first ones that come back on the market and get advertised. So I think, given that we are unfortunately experiencing a slowdown in the growth of employment, probably an uptick in unemployment due to the country's economic stagnation and certain tax changes like the employers' NICs rights, that when the job market eventually starts to rebound, whether these jobs are the first back on the market. Because if they're not, it potentially suggests that ChatGPT and Claude and similar types of AI chatbots might be labour replacing technologies as opposed to labour complementary technologies. Now, that should all be fine in the long run, that these things always come back into equilibrium as people learn new skills and adapt to new circumstances. But I think we've got a little bit more evidence to gather before we can say ChatGPT is making people jobless.
Yeah, well, to see, exactly, and how much that new technology could actually be eating up jobs or just changing them. More on that to come a little bit later in the programme. Martha's rule, this idea that the rule instilled that as a family or a friend, as a you can get a second medical professional opinion when you're looking at treatment options. And the analysis in the paper is that actually families using that right to a second opinion is saving lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a really worthwhile rule to have on the NHS. It comes from a really, really tragic story of a young girl called Martha Mills who died of, I believe, sepsis after life-saving medical interventions were sort of previously dismissed and her symptoms were dismissed, and she unfortunately later went on to pass away. And so I think in response to those kinds of tragic cases, it makes a lot of sense to be able to give parents, at the very least, peace of mind that if they, people often just kind of have this deep-seated feeling that there is something more wrong, even if it's not showing up in a very obvious way. Doctors make mistakes, they make bad calls. I think it's really important to be able to have that second opinion. And indeed, if it's already saving lives, or even if it's just giving people more peace of mind and more confidence, that's certainly a good thing.
Yeah, that shows how sort of instrumental it's already been. Final thing, of course, I'm at a major global sporting tournament today, Wimbledon. The Times asked this morning, could crosswords be an Olympic sport? The British pastime goes global. I would be utterly useless. A cryptic crossword, I don't think I could do one to save my life. But even the easy ones are sort of beyond me. Why is it gaining in so much popularity? And surely it's not going to be at the Olympics.
Well, who knows? I mean, it is pretty remarkable that what for me is synonymous with like sitting in my grandma's kitchen as a kid and just not really having much else to do and just doing a crossword. It seems even to me like a kind of anachronistic British pastime. Seems to be gaining popularity, particularly in Asia and India and China. People getting competitive over this stuff. I mean, I absolutely love it. It almost feels like a great British export, maybe a great American export these days. Long may it continue. As far as the Olympics are concerned, I have kind of real principles on this. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that squash isn't a full-fledged Olympic sport yet. Once they include squash in the Olympics, I think we can start talking about other things, maybe even crosswords, but squash first.
What about paddle too? And I should say that quietly, probably at Wimbledon, but there we go. Harrison, thank you so much. Harrison Griffiths, the political commentator with Young Voices UK.